Let's press T to bring up our tool shelf, and with this cube selected, press Tab to go into edit mode. And down here in our extended tools here, we have vertex tools, edge tools, and face tools. To the far right, we have mesh cleanup tools, but we're going to save these for another video and just focus on these three branches of tools here. So over here on our vertex tools, we have bevel vertices, which this will bevel all the vertex points we happen to have selected, which right now we have all of it selected. So if we were to press bevel vertices, we'll see this line show up, and the farther we pull this line out, the more these vertex points will become beveled. If we scroll our mouse wheel up, this will increase the amount of subdivisions within the bevel. If we press Ctrl Z and say we only selected one point, the hotkey for this is Ctrl B for bevel. And as you'll see in all of these tools, there's the option to bevel edges as well as faces. Ctrl B will bevel whatever you happen to have selected depending on whatever kind of mode you're in. So if we are in a vertex selection here and we have a vertex point selected and we press Ctrl B, this will bevel this vertex point. Of course, I can increase or decrease that by scrolling my mouse wheel up. And so if we were in edge selection, so I were to select this edge and press Ctrl B, then the edge would be selected, and we can of course increase and decrease that. The smooth vertex tool, this basically uses the same math that the subsurf modifier uses when it's trying to figure out how to bend all of the subdivisions together to make them smoother, only rather than adding a modifier, it just applies that effect only to whatever vertices you happen to have selected. So for instance, if I were to shift scroll down for vertex selection, then hold C and paint this area of vertex points here and press smooth vertices, you can see that smoothing the effects of that bevel out, and it actually gets, much better, which is nice. Well, another example would be if I were to press Tab to go back into object mode, double right click over here and add a monkey. Say we added a few subsurface levels on that, press S to scale, Tab to go back into edit mode, tap W to subdivide all of the actual faces in this monkey mesh here. If we were then to press smooth vertex, it will smooth this out much in the way the Cat-Mule-Clark math inside the subsurf modifier. So the convex hole button here will take whatever vertices you happen to have selected and create a shape around them wherein there are no concave spaces. So a concave space is an area over a surface that dips inwardly. So if you were to get rid of that, then you would have all convex shapes. So if I were to do this for this entire Suzanne monkey head, if I were to press this button with all of those vertex points selected, this generates a shape that goes around the entire head. So you can almost kind of think of it as like saran wrapping space. But where this gets really useful and really cool is if we press Ctrl Z to undo that, is that we can actually just do this with a selection of faces. So we don't have to do it with the entire thing. So I could click a face like this, hold C to bring up my circle select brush, and just make some kind of weird selection or something like that, and then press this button, and it's going to fill in mesh in that gaped area. And of course, as with any tool we just used, we can always double tap space to bring up the options for that tool. So we could delete unused bits of the faces around it, join triangles, and various options. Of course, you can get to that same menu here if you prefer to leave this open all the time. So I'll just close that back. Next up, we have merge vertices. This is sometimes referred to as welding vertices in other programs. So if I hold Shift and scroll down to get vertex selection, this will basically just bring two vertex points or more together. So if I were to say, click this point here and say I wanted to merge it with this one, I would just click this point, then shift select that point, press merge vertices, and you get this menu that pops up. And if you click at first, it will merge the last vertex point you selected to the first one, and at last, vice versa. So if we click at last, that vertex point that was here gets merged up there. So if I say wanted to merge these two to this one, I would shift select these and then finally shift select that last one and then press this and click at last, and those would be brought up to that one there. We can also just press M to bring up this menu as well. And so if we wanted to merge a bunch of these to the center of a selection, we would just press this or press M and click at center, and all of these vertex points are going to get merged to the point. Under that, we have rip fill and rip. So I'm going to show you what rip does first because it will help make rip fill make more sense. So we can use this rip to tear apart where a selection of vertices are. So if I were to shift scroll down and then shift select some vertex points here. So if I press Z, you can see my selection a little bit better. There's these vertex points here. Press Z to go back into solid viewport shading. So if we press rip, this is literally just going to rip these vertex points apart here. So wherever we want this selection to be. So I could actually select a point, shift select some more here, shift select something like this, then press rip, and that gets ripped there. So that can be pretty useful. And then of course rip fill will do nearly the same thing, except for the area where it gets ripped, it will fill with mesh. So when I ripped these points away from the Suzanne head here, it was just full of space, but we could also fill it with mesh. So if I were to say select a few vertices like this and press rip fill, then that rips this from here, but now these faces have been generated in between where this ripped. Press Shift A and add a simple cube here. So let's press Tab to go back into edit mode. So if we shift scroll up to make sure we're in edge selection, and I select one of these edges, I can either press this bevel edges button, or of course we can just press Control B for any mode we're in to do that mode's type of beveling. So here we can bevel this edge, we can scroll up to increase the amount of times it's beveled, or scroll down to decrease that like this. And then I could say Alt select this edge here, and then shift select these other two edges because I don't want them selected. So if I press Z to go into wireframe, you can see exactly what I wanted selected here. Z to go back into solid viewport shading. So if we press Control B again, or you could just press this bevel edges button, we can bevel this. And then of course we can, scroll up to increase the amount of times that's beveled as well. So now it's starting to get a pretty smooth shape here where we want, which is pretty cool. Press Tab to go back into edit mode. Bevel weight. This will bevel whatever edges we have selected if we are using a bevel modifier and have that modifier set to weight. So I'll show you what I'm talking about here. I press Tab to go back into object mode, and under add modifier, we can add bevel. Or the really fast way to do that, because we use this bevel a lot, is just to click it here in our menu. It will pop up here in our modifier list. If we set this to weight, then whatever edges that we bevel, if I press Tab to go into edit mode with this button here, will be beveled. So for instance, say I only wanted this edge and this edge here to be beveled out of this whole object. Rather than the whole object being beveled at once, which is what will happen if this is on angle or none, if we have it on weight, only the edges that we select and increase this bevel weight value will get beveled. So you can see that getting beveled down there. It's kind of hard to see, so I'll press Control Z to undo that and then kind of zoom in on here and then press this again. You can see that those edges getting beveled. So if I were to bring it real far out like that and then increase the amount of segments, press Tab to go back into object mode, you can see where this has been beveled here. So edge crease here, this will crease all the edges. This is mostly if you're using a subsurface modifier. So if I were to press Tab to go back into object mode, and let's go ahead and press X to delete this. Let's press Shift A and add a cube. And so the long way to do this is under add modifier, click subdivision surface, and then turn on smooth shading and then increase these values. Or the fast way, which we like to do in Sensei format, is just to tap W a few times on an object, which does the same thing. So if we press Tab to go back into edit mode, we can either press the edge crease button here, or we can press Alt E and bring our slider out, and this will increase these edges. So this is nice because you can do this, with the entire object, of course, or you can just do it with specific edges. So if I press Alt E and then bring this all the way back down, and you'll see these lines going from having this extra orange highlight to having none, and that means the edge crease is back down to 0. So you could just select a few of these that you wanted to crease, and then press this edge crease button or Alt E like this, and just crease those out however you wanted. And then so if we tap W a few times to increase the subsurface smoothing, we'll get, some kind of result like that or something. I typically find that not to be a really great way to add definition to the objects you're trying to model. I think it's better to use, loop cuts and actual adding of more mesh, but it's kind of a nice last resort if you've already done that with everything. Press Shift A and let's add another monkey shape because they're easy to work with. Press S to scale, tap W a few times to give it some smoothing. Press Tab to go back into edit mode. If I double click anywhere off this object, that will deselect everything. So there's no marked seams on this monkey head right now, but if I were to Alt select this edge here, this will select this whole loop around here. So if I press Z, you can kind of see that a little better. Then I can press this Mark Seams button. And now if I double click off here, you can see that there's this new kind of yellowish orange line which marks where this seam is. So imagine you're a taxidermist and you're trying to figure out, okay, I need to get all the skin off of this head here and be able to stretch it all flat to lay it down flat on the ground. Where are the lines that I should cut this skin off so I can lay all these things flat? And that's what you're thinking about when you're marking seams and making UV maps. So this seam we just made around the face will allow the front part of this face sort of to be cut off and stretched out flat, and then the back half of the head will be done the same. But it would probably be better if we went ahead and selected a seam here for this ear here, and so we could go ahead and select the same thing over here, press Alt Shift to add to that loop selection, and we can press Mark Seams and it will mark all those at once. So if I double click to click off of that, we can see those are now marked. If I press Z to go into wireframe, we can see it a bit better. So now we've told the taxidermist where we would like all the skin to be cut, we can unwrap it. So if I were to press A to select everything, and then under unwrap here, I would just want to do this basic unwrap because this will use the seams that we marked. Anything else won't use the seams, it uses this other types of special projection. But if I press unwrap, this will unwrap this. Then if I press this edit UVs button, this sends us into the image editor here, which we could have just, changed manually by clicking through this menu. And so here you can see where that face was cut off and stretched flat. So sort of the taxidermist did what we asked him to. So we can either come here and switch back to 3D view or just press this go back button. That's kind of the point of seams. We'll get a lot more into that later. And of course, any seams that you don't want, you want to get rid of, you can just press clear seams. Now if we double click off of everything selected, all those seams are gone. The mark freestyle and clear freestyle, these are referring to marking freestyle seams, which these are for if you're using the freestyle render engine, which we're not going to be getting into today, but you can, mark seams in the same way that you mark regular seams. So that's those, and then we already went over the edit UVs. This just quickly jumps us into the image editor, but we're currently in paint mode, so if we switch this over to view, this will then allow us to manually edit this UV map here. So I'll press go back here. So on to face tools, press tab to go into object mode, tap X to delete that, press Shift A and add a basic cube, then press tab to go back into edit mode. Of course, we can bevel faces by pressing this bevel faces button, and when we do that, you see the end result is kind of like a basic bevel modifier we might add. We can scroll up to increase the amount of beveling or scroll down to decrease that. So I could click to confirm that or press Ctrl Z to undo that and just do a single face. So any one of these faces here, I could either press this bevel faces and then we could shift scroll up to do a bevel like this. And once again, whatever type of mesh selection mode we happen to be in, that's the type of beveling that will be done when we press Ctrl B. So if I were to shift scroll down for vertex selection and click this point here and I press Ctrl B here, then we're gonna get that vertex type beveling. So if I were to shift scroll up and then select a few edges here and press Ctrl B here and bring my mouse up and scroll that up a bit, that's the type of beveling we'll get there. So between those three different type of bevel modes, we can end up doing a lot of cool modeling stuff. I'll press tab to go back into edit mode. This solidify faces button I think is actually not really that useful. I think it's much better to use a solidify modifier. So if I were to press tab to go into object mode, X to delete that, Shift A, and let's add a monkey again, S to scale, 1 to go into front view here, And let's tap W a few times to give it some smoothing. Tab to go back into edit mode. Shift scroll down for vertex selection. And then you can either press Z so we can select through this entire thing, or you can just click this button here, which allows us to select through everything. And I'll press B to do a border select. And then I want to select all these points just next to this line, but not including the line. Then tap X to delete all that, and then I'll turn that back off. Here is this, monkey head cut in half. And if we were to press A to select everything, we could press solidify faces, and you'll see that this gets solidified. So it's basically just extruded this out evenly. So if I were to press S to scale, you can see this a bit better. So this is basically just like adding a solidify modifier, only once it's done, and you don't have any more control over it. So don't really recommend using that. So I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that. Much better is to just, under the add modifier, just add a solidify modifier, which will do the same thing, only this will give you, much more control. And once you've adjusted this, it doesn't have to stay that way. You can change this whenever you need. Press X to delete that, Shift A, let's add a basic cube again, tap go into edit mode. So if I were to tap W a couple of times to subdivide this, and then we press poke faces, then we could say shift scroll down for vertex selection, and then under my select option here, I could do something like a checker deselect. Then if I were to press S to scale, I could scale these points out like this. And so that gives us, kind of an interesting result there. These next three tools, the make edge, face, grid fill, and fill, these tools are all combined into a single smart hotkey in Sensei format, which is known as smart fill, which also does some other things, which we do by pressing F while in edit mode. But I'll show you what each of these things do, and then I'll show you how the F key smartly will usually choose the right one whenever you need it. So I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode, press X to delete that, press Shift A, and let's add a basic monkey shape here, S to scale, and let's press tab to go into edit mode here. So the make edge face, this will fill in whatever empty space where a face or an edge might go. So if I were to shift select some faces up here, press X to delete those, and then shift scroll up, go back into edge selection, and then Alt select this loop of edges here. If we press make edge face, this will fill this area in. And it's nice that it filled it in for us, but it filled it in with what we call an n-gon. And an n-gon is basically any polygon shape, any face with more than 4 sides like this one. So see, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different sides to form this one shape. And sometimes you can get away with that, but typically what this will end up doing, if we're not hard modeling like this, if we're, say, subsurface modeling, is mess up the way things look when we add smoothing to them. So if I were to press tab to go back into object mode, tap W a few times, and actually here, it doesn't look too bad, but oftentimes this can cause trouble for us, so we generally like to stay away from it. So I'll press tab to go back into edit mode, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that subsurface modifier. An alternative to that is to use the grid fill. So if we were to press space to go into face selection, select this big n-gon, tap X to delete it, and then shift scroll up for edge selection, and then Alt select this, and use this grid fill instead. This grid fill more intelligently tries to actually connect each edge with each edge to give us 4-sided polygons, which work way better with smoothing, UV maps, and all kinds of things. And then, of course, this fill option will basically do the same thing as the grid fill, only it's not so careful to try to get these faces to try to line up in the way that we want. On the other hand, it's more useful for when we have more complex holes. So for instance, if I were to shift select all these faces here and then say maybe shift select some down like this. So say I've got kind of like a weird selection like this, and I tap X to delete it, and then I shift scroll up, and then I Alt shift select all of these edges, so I complete this circuit here. So if we press Z to go into wireframe, we can see this is all selected in a complete circuit. So if we were to press grid fill here, everything gets filled, but not exactly in the way we wanted. So if I press Ctrl Z to undo that, so the fill button can handle, well, it didn't handle it that great in this situation, but a lot of situations, the fill can handle more complex holes that you're trying to fill by comparison to the grid fill, whereas if you're doing a real simple fill, the grid fill will generally be better. But in this case, both of these didn't really do a great job. So what you would really want to do is kind of much more incrementally try to fill these holes up. By comparison, if we were to just press the make edge face here, this just fills the entire thing with a single end-on, which is a total mess. So that's what those tools there do. Typically though, you don't need to worry about any of that. You can just press F and the Sensei Format Smart Fill will figure out the most appropriate thing to do. So if I were to press Control Z and then hit Control Z again to undo all that. So we may want to come down here, select this edge and this edge, press F. We could select these and press F there, and then Alt select this loop here, press F to insert a face there. Then we could select this and this, press F here. And then we could Alt select this, tap F, and that would, grid fill there. So almost finished here. Next we have this make wireframe tool. So this will basically conform the mesh to take the shape of what the wireframe would look like. So if I were to shift select all these faces up here, then press make wireframe and click off of here. So this is now converted these mesh faces into wireframe. So that's kind of cool. Or we could of course Control Z and then do that to the entire thing. We could press A to select all of it and then press make wireframe and tab to go back into object mode, and we would have this sweet Suzanne head wireframe. Shift A and add a cube again. Then if we press tab to go back into edit mode, finally we have this intersect meshes. This will basically cause whatever chunk of mesh you're holding and you have selected to cut lines into the rest of the mesh. So if I were to say press D to duplicate this mesh here and bring this over here, and then press intersect meshes, this would actually cut a hole into all the mesh that wasn't selected. So if I were to select all of these faces from this cube left over here and tap X to delete these and clean that up, then we have this cut made from that mesh. So we could select all of these and press E to extrude them or do something else or delete them or whatever. This is another one of those situations where you don't really want to use the mesh tool version of this. I mean, occasionally, rarely, it can, be a nice quick way to handle something. The same with solidify faces. Rather than using this, it's much better to use the shape tools, which we've got a whole nother tutorial coming up on them because they're super awesome. Rather than go through all that, we could press tab to go back into object mode. I'll press X to delete that, Shift A and add another cube. So it's way easier to just use the shape tools. I'll give you just a tiny example. We're going to get a lot more into these because they do a lot of really impressive things. So say I were to press D to duplicate this while in object mode, shift select the object I want stuff done to, then just press cut out, and this will automatically be cut out. Then we can press G to grab, S to scale. We can continue adjusting this. We can even press D to duplicate this and add more effects like this. So in this way, the shape tools are extremely powerful for this kind of stuff, and they do even more stuff that I'm really excited to show you, but we're gonna have to wait for another tutorial to get into that. If you wanted to apply that, you could just press all, and that would finish that up. And then if you press tab to go into edit mode, here's that finished shape. So that pretty much wraps us up for this video. We just kind of blazed through these basic tools, but I encourage you to take some time and kind of experiment with each one of these. I know it's a lot, but that's why it's called a crash course.